Hey everyone, welcome back to Munro Live. Today we have a treat for you. It's Thermal System Day. And I'm here with Ben Lindemood. And what we're going to do today is run through all of the components on the Model S Plaid and compare and contrast them with our Model Y. Now, when we first tore down the Model Y, we were really amazed by three things. The super manifold, right here, the octo valve, and this large ethylene glycol manifold right there. Now, these may look identical to what we saw in the Model Y because they pretty much are, Ben. So as we tore down the Model S Plaid, we wanted to see how many parts carried over from the Model Y to the Model S. And from our rough estimation, it looks like about 40 to 45% of the core components are common. Now, all of the lines and some of the ancillary items change because of the shape of the car and whatnot. But Ben, why don't you kick us off and start talking about the super manifold?
All right. The super manifold, like Cory said, is almost identical to what was on the Model Y. We do have a new part number on this now. We haven't seen anything that's changed. We'll probably open up the end of this, similar to what we did on the Y, to take a look inside to see if there's anything that they have actually changed. But this is what is handling most of the AC coolant that's going on. It's directing everything. There's a lot of valves that are mounted to this. And again, same setup as the Model Y. So they'll turn them on, open and close them, depending on what they need to do for heating or cooling.
Yeah, and Ben, you said AC coolant, but really it's the R1234YF. It's the refrigerant pumps through this aluminum manifold. It's a semi-solid forging with a stamped steel or a sheet aluminum backing plate that's brazed in place. And one thing we really liked about this on the Model Y and the Model S is the planes that that all of your connections are on. So these ports right here are what go out to the dash, and all of these ports right here interface with the chiller, the liquid-cooled condenser, the line from the actual pump, as well as all of your valves and temperature sensors, thermal expansion valves. They're all packed in real tight and close together. When we look at a lot of other EVs, typically these monuments are spread around the engine bay. So you would have a chiller on one side of the engine bay, you'd have a thermal expansion valve on the dash. Just like the Model Y, the Model S Plaid has the identical tight packaging. And the next piece right here is the liquid-cooled condenser, which we may call the LCC. This is exactly the same height of a stack as the Model Y. We measured it, it was like
101 millimeters. So it is the same part, but they have gone away from the banding that they had to do, this Band-Aid that was on the Model Y. We had an early Model Y. They've been able to mount this now, so they aren't getting the vibration characteristics that they were early on with the Model Y.
The ethylene glycol is routed through this plastic manifold. Now this plastic manifold interfaces very neatly around this aluminum semi-solid forging, and on the back side you can see all of the ports that the octo valve interfaces with. So here's the octo valve. You see the little octopus there. And so far, these core components that we've highlighted already are all identical from the Model Y, technically to the Model 3 and the Model S. And we also assume forward-thinking these core components can be used pretty much on any Tesla vehicle. And here is the liquid-cooled condenser. So this plate chiller interfaces the ethylene glycol and the refrigerant, the R1234YF. You can see right here you have your ports for the ethylene glycol and then your two ports for the refrigerant. And that's how that interface happens. The next component, Ben.
I just wanted to, real quick, as we're looking at this and how this is all tightly packaged, like you were talking about, Cory, what that does for Tesla is it eliminates the need for additional hoses. When we have parts that are spread around, it makes for more parts that you need to connect them all. They've been able to do this all with just a few pieces and bringing it all together. So they don't have a bunch of snap rings or quick connects or anything else to bring everything together. It's all mounted to one place with no hoses in between it. It's all the manifolds that are in between.
Now, the high side and low side pressure is supplied by this line right here. This goes from your high voltage AC compressor or high voltage heat pump to this unit right here. And I'm going to step over here so you can see the line as assembled on the Model Y, essentially nearly identical. Now, Ben said that there's been slight part number changes for many of these, and ultimately they remain, you know, almost common. I believe that goes right like this. This thing's upside down. Turn it around. So our intent in roughly assembling this is to compare and contrast the S to the Model Y. The core components of the thermal system so far are pretty much identical. Now, Ben, you want to talk about this? This is the chiller?
This is the chiller. And again, this is the same size stack as what was on the Model Y. They were both 80 millimeters tall. So we haven't, they do say what vehicle it is. It says Model Y on here on the tag. So they could be a little bit of difference, but they're the same part essentially. Nope. And then, yep. And then where this mounts in, you can see again, it just goes right in to both of the manifolds, and it'll be another heat exchanger between the aluminum manifold and for the refrigerant and the glycol manifold.
Yeah, and the purpose of the liquid-cooled condenser and the chiller are different. So the liquid-cooled condenser is where you're going to reject the heat that's generated when you compress the refrigerant. This is typically accomplished through a condenser that's out in front of the car. So if you've ever driven an internal combustion engine vehicle, you have your radiator, you have your condenser. This is a liquid-cooled condenser. So although this vehicle does have two heat exchangers out front, they're going to pump that ethylene glycol through this plate exchanger to pull that heat out. It's also, depending on the setting of the valving here, you can pull that heat out to heat something in the vehicle. So we're not going to go through in depth of all the different valve settings of the octovalve. Our team has studied them extensively. That would take quite some time. But the liquid-cooled condenser eliminates the need to pump that refrigerant all the way out to the front of the car. The chiller, on the other hand, is where you're going to have a thermal expansion valve before you enter this plate heat exchanger. So you are going to have very cold R1234YF. Then you'll flow some ethylene glycol over that to chill the ethylene glycol to then maybe cool the battery, cool the motor. So the chiller does exactly what the name states. It's for chilling. Liquid-cooled condenser is just a liquid-cooled condenser. Now we're going to talk about the lines that leave this whole pack right here. Ben's going to grab them real quick.
We'll start with the refrigerant lines if you want, Corey. The lines that are going from the octovalve assembly from the heat pump into the cabin are a little bit different, you'll see, than what was on the Model Y. These have to jog over towards the driver before they go into the cabin. So they are a little bit different, but they are essentially, they're serving the same purpose as what they were. So when Tesla did not need to redesign this whole portion of the system, they just needed to change a little bit of the flow path.
And if anybody can remember back to the instrument panel video that I did with Scott Hoffman about a half a week ago, I did mention that the location of these ports, the way it interfaces with the instrument panel and the HVAC module, was less ideal because of this jog. I really love the fact that on the Model Y and the Model 3, it leaves that manifold and essentially goes straight to the dash in a pack of 5 lines. This same pack of 5 lines at a slightly different angle, not as elegant, but still pretty good compared to what we see. Oftentimes these lines will route all around an engine bay for other OEMs, EV or internal combustion engine. So another thing that we haven't really hit on yet is the beam that supports this large mass. On the Model Y and I think the Model 3, correct? They use this steel crosscar beam. There's a large aluminum beam extrusion that's used on the Model S Plaid. We talked about this in an earlier video with Sandy, that they're also using it, co-using it as a reservoir for the air suspension system. Now, we posted a picture on Instagram, or I should say Eric posted a picture on Instagram, and a lot of people were talking about how bad these welds look. So let's get a nice close-up here of every angle of the weld. I didn't see a problem with them. They look okay. Not that bad, but there was a lot of uproar over this. Now, there's a decent amount of, black soot and char from the weld. They could have cleaned it up to make it look a little nicer. Now, keep in mind, these welds are underneath a beauty cover in the frunk. So when you open your frunk, you don't see this. So this is something we exposed, put on the internet, and a lot of uproar over these weld qualities. So I'm not a welding expert, so if there's a welding expert, now you have a nice close-up to weigh in on what you think about the quality of this. These are the 2 points where the whole super manifold assembly hangs from. I believe it's upside down. Is it this way?
Spin it around the other way. There you go. That would be.
So let's do a little comparison. Slightly different, but the mounting points are in a similar location in the car. What's next, Ben?
And then with this, they did change a few of the other parts that hang off of this. As we're talking about the thermal system and this super beam, they did go and they've been able to add some of their electronics there in the engine bay to hang off of this. You could see that the super beam was a little bit longer, so they've utilized that space to, again, one part, multiple functions. Instead of having a separate bracket for this to hang off of the aluminum and the body in white, they were able to incorporate it in. And another thing that they did that Cory has in his hand is the lithium-ion battery that they are now using.
I love how light this thing is. It's tiny, it's small, and it hangs off the beam. I'm going to show you the three points where it connects. So although they have 4 bolt locations here and 1 here, they're only utilizing 3. It's cantilevered off the beam. Where you have a 4-way, you have a hole, there's a slot there, and then another slot right there. They use these 3 small, what are they? M8, M6 bolts.
It'll say on the tag if you flip it over.
Yeah, M6 by 21 bolts to secure this. Now compare and contrast this mounting method to the traditional 12-volt battery on the Model Y.
Right, well, this is much heavier. This is at 13.25 kilograms. That is 1.8 kilograms, I want to say. It's on the tag just in front of you there, Cory.
That's correct.
So 1.8, so you're at 11.5 kilograms heavier for this. You need to do a whole lot more to be able to mount this lead acid battery on here. So they have this large casting that is mounted to the back of it that the battery will sit in and then strap in. So going to lithium ion, the battery does cost more, but it is a significant weight savings. You're reducing the mounting bracket that has to be here for the battery, and you're taking the weight out for this. So it's overall a functional improvement to the car as well as the weight savings.
Now, Ben, I have a question for you. Do you think the structure of that AC compressor mount and battery mount is driven by the weight of the battery or the weight of the compressor?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both. You've got a large, again, 13 kilograms hanging off the back of this, and then you have to isolate your AC compressor. And what they've been able to do on the Model Y is bring in this plastic mount for the AC compressor. So they've been able to get rid of this aluminum casting that you see here and use a piece of plastic, which is a much easier component to make. There's not any machining that needs to be done afterwards. It all can be cast in, or molded in, excuse me, features.
Now the NVH cover, noise, vibration, and harshness, for those acronym lovers out there, This is on our Model S. Our Model Y was so early it didn't receive one. And essentially every Model Y and Model 3, I don't want to say made after ours, but all the current ones have an NVH cover like this or similar to it. This is absorption, barrier absorption. I call it ABA. So you have an absorption material on the outside, a barrier material, and absorption material. Sometimes we see just AB, barrier and absorption. And when I peeled this back, we wanted to see if they upsized the high voltage AC compressor for the Model S because of the thermal needs. And the answer is essentially no. It's the same size, it's the same weight, I believe it's the same model. This is 150-1256-00L for the part number.
This is -F, so it's a few revisions earlier. So the Model Y is not any different than what they're putting on the Model S.
Where they do make some changes on the thermal system is the addition of 2 pumps. So when we tore down the Mach-E, we kind of gave it a little bit of ribbing because it had 4 pumps and the Model Y and the Model 3 have 2. Those 2 pumps, the 2 original pumps, are still identical to the Model Y and the Model 3, and these are integrated into the ethylene glycol manifold that we showed earlier. These are traditional pumps that we see other OEMs use where you have an inlet and an outlet and disassociated discrete mounting. Here is one of those mounting points. And the one nice thing is they at least integrated it into an existing part. And it just fits in here somewhat like that. Now, Ben, can you go ahead and talk through why they added these extra pumps?
All right, so the Model S has a larger cooling demand than what the Model Y had. So now they have 2 radiators at the front of their vehicle where they used to only have the single radiator. When you go and we went into track mode, we had to sit for 17 minutes before we could drive it. What we believe is happening, we're still digging through all of the stuff that's going on here, but there is a valve, Cory, right here that is now in this system that will change the flow of the coolant and it'll allow you to utilize that second radiator. So we think that when it goes in and needs to pre-cool, that it's turning on the second radiator, using the pumps to get through and keep cooling faster. So if you're using the pumps, you could get more throughput with the coolant.
Now, if Ben and I had to hypothesize, I would say these are Plaid only pumps and valves. Would you? I believe that the thermal system as is, utilizing the Model Y and Model 3 components, is sufficient to support a normal Model S or Model X. These components are what we typically see. They call them off-the-shelf components, COTS. Right. What does COTS mean?
Commercial off the shelf. Yeah, you got it.
And I know that we give a lot of other OEMs a hard time for choosing these options, but because the Model S is a very low runner, I don't know how many they make a year, a couple thousand, they're still utilizing all the heavy lifting and heavy engineering of this integration for the Model 3 and the Model Y, and then using off-the-shelf components to support that extra cooling need for them to be able to run the Nürburgring without overheating.
Right, and that's a very cost-efficient way of doing it on something that is low volume. They're using their high-volume, cheap parts where they can, and then utilizing something off the shelf to integrate or to upgrade the system where it's needed. And then there are more hoses. If we look here in the Model S, it is doing more. There is an extra motor that's in the back of the vehicle. There's an extra radiator that they have to run hoses to. So compared to the Y, there are more lines than what they had.
Yeah, and in the rear motor unit itself, they have the 2 plate heat exchangers because there's 2 motors back there. There's also an extra inverter to go to, so you have 2 inverters, as well as, what was the extra thing? Oh, there's a third transmission oil, or it's gear oil pump on the rear unit that's circulating fluid through that. And the one thing we noticed that we didn't like is the fact that there is a few EPDM hoses and 4 constant tension spring clamps. When we first tore down the Model 3 in 2018, we were blown away that they had committed to essentially 100% PA12 nylon lines with quick connects or quick disconnects, however you want to talk about it. And the whole vehicle was devoid of any EPDM lines and constant tension spring clamps. These 2 lines run to the computer. So it is the ADAS computer, but what else is there, Ben?
It does a lot with the vehicle controls. We're still going through the electronics, but it is more than just ADAS. The sticker on the part calls it the car computer, and that's, from what we understand, really what it is. It's handling a lot of the functions inside the car.
And Eric, if you walk over here, I'll put these parts right next to their counterparts. They did choose the nylon lines for those exact same parts, but right here they are EPDM.
And why is EPDM, why would we prefer a nylon line to an EPDM line, Cory?
Weight and quality. It's less likely to leak at all of these joint paths than EPDM. What do you say, Ben? That's my opinion on that.
I agree with you, yes.
This may look like a huge hodgepodge of wires and hoses and pumps and valves, but when it boils down to it, Tesla is reusing the core heart of their thermal system on their most expensive, highest performance vehicle. It is not a bespoke thermal system on the Model S Plaid. Many of those core components, all of that engineering effort, the ingenuity behind the octovalve, the ingenuity behind the super manifold is reused on the Model S Plaid, as well as the Model S, the Model X, backwards compatible to the old Model 3s. And if I had to guess, the same core thermal system will be carried over into future Tesla vehicles to come, like the Cybertruck. Ben, what's your final thoughts?
Like you said, just really impressed with how much they've been able to reuse. Looking at a car that has this type of performance at the relatively low cost of $130,000, was wondering how they were able to do it, and this is showing us how they're able to do it. They are utilizing their 500,000 a year volume from their standard cars and putting those components not just in thermal system, but we saw it when we tore down the motors. They're carrying parts over across the vehicles. So it's just being able to engineer them with enough forethought when they first release them to be able to have the capability to expand on them to their high performance vehicle.
All right, I think that wraps things up for today. I want to thank 2 groups of people. Everybody who purchased a bumper sticker, you enabled the purchase of the vehicle. I really want to thank everybody. Over 6,500 people contributed to that. Thank you very much. I also want to thank SABIC, the group there. We've worked closely with them on a few projects, and they helped enable the road trip. So that was very generous of them to help offset the costs of the road trip and some of the labor for this teardown. Really appreciate that. And everybody who subscribed in the last week. So Sandy is always real gun shy about asking people to subscribe, but I finally just mustered up the courage and asked in a video last week, and 1,000 new subscribers subscribed on that day. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And a lot more videos to come as we're only about halfway done through this teardown. So thank you, Ben, and thanks to everyone out there.